Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and I am here with my amazing sister and co host, Rachel Smith.
Hey, everyone.
We are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through your life and with your relationship with Yahweh. We are currently in a series on God's design for women's health, and we have a very special guest returning with us today, Mrs. Paula Carper. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun.
Yeah, we have a good time here with you, Paula. And just as a reminder, Paula is a registered dietitian and a women's hormone expert. She's it when it comes to understanding how our body works as women. So be sure to listen to the last episode if you haven't yet, because that's kind of the beginning of this conversation. And if you want to go all the way back, also listen to episodes 18 and 19. Because Paula joined us there, and that was awesome as well. But today we're jumping back into this conversation that we've been having about diet culture, nourishing our bodies, and really just breaking free from the system, and that system being society and what it's telling us about weight loss and dieting and how we should look and how we should be, and really focusing on how God built our bodies and intended us to treat them and care for them. So when we left our conversation from last week, we were talking about the importance of protein, but mostly the importance of a balanced diet. And
Mhm.
Paula mentioned that sometimes when we kind of get sucked in some of those extremes, like with vegetarianism or veganism, and eat too many vegetables, it can actually disrupt our stomach acid or our microbiome in our stomachs, which in turn can cause digestion issues. And that's something that I would love to hear more about, Paula, is digestion. And what do we need to know? Because this is not something that we as a society really talk about much.
Yeah. So that's just to clarify, I think one of the things that I want you to think about is like if you're not eating a lot of protein, then your body is going to downregulate the things that, it needs to like digest it. It's just not going to need them, right? So that's really what I'm talking about when I see women who have been following maybe more vegetarian or vegan diets,
Hmm.
or just not prioritizing protein. They start to, when they start to reintroduce it or introduce it at higher intakes, then what they'll start to see is that they aren't able to digest it as well, and they have, more bloating, more problems, slower digestion. So one of the things that is happening there is that partly they have not really optimized maybe their mineral intake, really getting all the things that they need to create stomach acid. Also their stress levels, the speed at which they eat, how much they chew their food, all these things really play in. And when we think about, vegetables aren't bad, but when we think about eating vegetables that are cooked, or we think about eating breads that are cooked, these are all softer foods in that form. But when we eat meat, when it's cooked or when it's raw, it's a little more difficult to chew. It takes a lot more effort to chew. So if you have bad habits because you eat a lot of soft foods and you're used to only chewing like a few times per bite and you swallow, that's not going to affect you as much when you have a piece of bread as when you have a piece of steak, right?
Hmm.
So digestion starting even before food gets in the mouth, but particularly when it gets into the mouth, you have enzymes that are coating the food from your saliva. This is a process that is important to that breakdown of that food. So when we think about a food like animal protein, like meat, beef, chicken, turkey, fish, anything like that, fish being a little bit easier to digest, in terms of chewing. But when you start to see that, it's like, if you're used to eating softer foods, you're going to have the same habits when you eat those foods that are harder to chew. So if you've ever noticed people, and you've watched them, people you might know that you eat with a lot who don't really spend a lot of time chewing their food, they probably often have a lot of digestive problems, and it can be upper or lower. So I think this is really a big factor. It's like if they have not been eating a lot of protein, then they don't have the habits of chewing. So one of the things I usually recommend is like chewing your food a lot, especially if you're going to increase your protein intake, because you need to get that meat ground up into much, much finer pieces, because your stomach, can only do so much. So that's a part of the picture. And then the stomach acid, the robustness of the stomach acid is going to play another role. And that is impacted a lot of times by stress levels. Do you sit down and really relax to eat? We talk about, there's the different states that you can be in, the fight or flight or the rest and digest state. If you're going to sit down and eat a big steak, you want to be in a rest and digest state. You don't want to be eating on the fly and on the run and like just running off. You don't want to be real stressed either. If you're in a real stressed state, you're not going to have those digestive acids that are being, produced in the right amounts to really digest that food. So you really, this is a lot about the duality of the things that impact our health, and kind of how everything as we look at it is like this duality. There's something that provides a good aspect, and the other side is kind of like lower, and then there's this balance that kind of goes back and forth, and there's benefits to each of those sides. Well, just like that nervous system, fight or flight is good when you want to survive, but rest and digest is good when you want to live, when you're living, right? When you're living everyday life. So those are things that I see playing into this. And so that's in the upper part of the digestive system, but it's so critical to the lower part. Whatever happens up here, if it's not happening well, it affects everything below. And that's something that I really love to talk about, because the microbiome is below that. So when we have poor stomach acid and we can't digest our protein well, we're going to affect the microbiome in a negative way. So these things all play together, right? So really it starts with, one, chewing your food really well, particularly those proteins. And then two, having that good stomach acid. Because even then, when the digestive process, is happening in the stomach, and then it's releasing food that's been, churned and working with that acid into the small intestine, which is the next place it goes, that triggers, the gallbladder to release bile. That triggers some pancreatic enzyme release. So we've got some things that are going on after that, the next stage of digestion. And that level of stomach acid really impacts that. So this is, it's a process. It's a multi-step process. And we have to think about, like, what is the purpose of each of these parts of the process? It's a system, and we want it to work right. So we gotta think about all those factors. So it really,
I just wanted to ask, because first of all, I have about 1,000 questions. Hopefully I remember them all. What can women do to improve their stomach acid?
Yeah. So largely for most of the women that I work with, a lot of it really comes down to spending the time to get into a state of rest and digest, into that
Okay.
parasympathetic nervous system response.
Okay.
The other thing that you can do is eat foods that are more bitter, right? One of the things that when we used to eat meals in courses, which we really don't do anymore, but for years, we used to see food served in courses before the modern times. And there was like a bitter green salad with maybe some vinegar, right? That was part of a preparation. And that was before we knew the science. Bitter greens with a little bit of vinegar, right? And that was a preparation. It was a dinner salad. That was a preparation for the entree that was coming, which usually had some protein in it, right? So we can do digestive bitters. So there are tinctures that you can take. Some of them are in like pill forms, but mostly in tincture forms. And that can actually be taken before meals to like stimulate the gastric stomach acid. And again, one of the things I recommend before I even look at that is I recommend deep breathing when you sit down to eat, like sitting down and really breathing deep and doing these long inhales and exhales, kind of like you do when you're doing deep breathing to like get over an anxiety attack. It's like we're trying to come back into that parasympathetic state so that we can make sure we're in a state where our body's able to digest optimally. So that's just like some little practices. And then of course, chewing the food is going to be part of that process. Just, it's not going to necessarily stimulate a whole lot more stomach acid, but it does give time, and it gives that additional mechanical and enzyme support of digestion so that the stomach doesn't have to work as hard, right?
And how do
Yeah.
you know if you're having issues with something like this? Like I think of the examples you gave of like being in fight or flight or rest and digest. And as a mom of young kids, like I'm
Literally thinking the
literally
same
eating
exact
like
thing.
running through my house, or else I don't get to eat at all. Or like I actually think I took a video and I meant to send it to you yesterday, Rebecca, that I'm trying to eat my breakfast and the baby is on the floor between my legs, whining and screaming at me because he wanted me to give it to him, even though he already ate. And it was like, this is how it is for a mom eating it. Someone's
Mhm.
screaming at us, or we have to like walk around and eat. So I guess what I that was just kind of my own like example, but how I'm not eating right in like the physical way of sitting and relaxing. So what would that like symptoms be of not like stomach acid or how that affects my
Yeah.
digestion?
I'd love to add
Yeah.
on to that too, Paula, before you comment, because I was literally thinking the exact same thing as Rachel, that all I could think about, Paula, is how stressed out I am. And a lot of times I don't eat dinner until after I put the kids to bed because
Same.
I know you're making this make sense for me because God gave us our intuition for a reason, right? And
Mhm.
I intuitively feel that I don't want to eat if I can't sit down and enjoy the food that is in front of me.
Yeah.
I don't want it
Yeah.
because I don't feel like, oh, just cramming this in my mouth real fast in between helping my 3 young children doesn't feel right to me. So it's making sense what you're saying. It's my body saying, you do need to sit down, relax, and enjoy it, honey.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of great reasons for that. So that's really good, perception and listening to your intuition. But some of the ways that you'll know that you have, maybe have low stomach acid is, a lot of belching after meals. A lot of bloating and just slow digestion. Like you feel like your digestion is slow. Constipation can be one of the symptoms. But that can be, for a lot of reasons. But if your food's not being digested well, you can be constipated. So that can be one. I think ultimately most people who have poor stomach acid have slower digestion. They may have reflux, they may have belching and gas like in the upper part of their bodies, but they may also experience some of the digestive issues, that are in the lower part of the digestive tract. So that's something to look for. And there's also, obviously there's testing that you can do for this, medical testing you can do for this. That's just not as accessible and not ordered on a regular basis. So it's not even anything that I would typically recommend in terms of medical testing. But we actually in practice, a lot of functional practitioners will do gut testing, stool testing, and so we can see glimpses and insights into possibilities that are being impacted by stomach acid. We can't actually test the stomach acid, but we can actually kind of see how that might be impacting people from a microbial standpoint and just other digestive factors. And then one of the things that I use a lot in my practice is the burp test. And that is a test that you do 5 days in a row, or as many days as it takes to get five days of testing, where you take a baking soda and water solution in the morning, first thing in the morning, and you drink it and you see how long it takes you to burp. That will tell us more about like how your stomach acid might be. So it's a clue. It's
Interesting.
not, it's not, it's not super scientific in the sense that it's like a definitive test.
Mhm,
But it can tell us, because you're introducing a base, how essentially robust your stomach acid might be, at least first thing in the morning,
mhm,
without any food. So
mhm,
it shouldn't be diluted or anything like that at that time.
mhm,
And so if it takes you really long to burp, and your average of those 5 days is, more than a few minutes, it's very likely, if you have other symptoms, it's a pretty good bet. It's a pretty good guess. And it's just really common nowadays, because we eat so many highly processed foods and don't need to create a lot of stomach acid to digest those, that maybe a lot of people are experiencing that. And the older we get, we see that, I don't know if it's really always been this way, or if it, if it's just a natural progression. We don't really have data that I could feel good about on that. But as we get older, we tend to see people have lower stomach acid levels.
Interesting.
And that might just be
Very,
a fact of our modern lives.
yeah. And
know?
this kind of leads into the conversation on minerals. And I'm really curious about your thoughts on water intake and mineral intake.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of us don't get enough protein, as we've probably learned from last episode. What about Rachel's drinking her water right now? What about
Electrolytes.
hydration? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so they're definitely different than they used to be. But I think ultimately, everybody's going to have a little bit different needs for hydration. Again, some of that affected by what stage of life you're in. If you're nursing, you're producing a lot of milk, you're going to need a lot of water to produce that milk. If you're working outdoors a lot and you're living in the South, you're going to need more water. But we also have, homes that have heating now. And we dehydrate at levels that we don't even perceive a lot of times when we're in the wintertime and we're indoors a lot with central heating. So there's a lot of different factors that play into the variations. But I think ultimately, my standpoint on just overall general hydration is that, we can start with a baseline of around 8 glasses a day. There's been some research on stuff like that. And of course, that's been kind of a standard that people say. But I think what's more important than just the water is, of course, the quality of the water, the cleanliness of the water, and then also the electrolytes, the minerals that we're adding into them, because we don't drink water that is highly mineralized anymore. Whether we live in the city and we're drinking tap water, which I hope most people aren't doing, or we're living in the country like I do and we have well water. We're not, there's going to be an imbalance of minerals a lot of times in stuff in well water in particular. So we really have to think about, like, what are some of the minerals that we need? And of course, electrolyte drinks have really become popular, and I think it's a great way to add minerals to your water. I don't think we need to be excessive about it if we just have a normal, standard American lifestyle where we're just like mostly around the house all day or around the office. When we get into more activity, then we can start, and especially outdoors and in the heat, then we can start looking at adding. But a lot of times it's really, mineral mocktails, mineral cocktails, whatever you want to call them, or even just electrolyte drinks like once to twice a day for most people is going to be adequate. But there's a variety of electrolyte drinks on the market. And
That
so,
you can get marketed and might after you listen to this
yeah.
episode and it keywords into your brain.
Exactly. So I certainly, I mean, there are a few that I love, for a lot of different reasons. I certainly think we need more sodium, that also has some of the other trace minerals in it. So some of these high mineral salts, I think, can be really beneficial in our water.
Like Celtic sea salt or
Yeah,
Himalayan sea
absolutely.
salt.
Absolutely. Yeah. All those high mineral sea salts can be really great, to help bring that hydration in and actually get it into the cells and keep that electrolyte balance where it needs to be, which again, that's all regulated by our kidneys. That's a really important body feature. And it's something that is really important to, like, our blood pressure, our hydration management, urine production, which also affects, toxin removal, that kind of thing. So these are all important. So when I talk about hydration these days, I don't just talk about water or liquids. I'm usually
Yes.
talking about, minerals in addition to that. And
Because
so
it's
that
the
includes
combination
sodium,
of the two, right?
potassium.
That you really need
Absolutely.
to open the cell in order for it to be hydrated fully, right? That's like kind of what we've been
It needs to be
discovering
able to go
over.
in and out of the cells. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of that is impacted
Interesting.
by, lymphatic system and all these other things. But I think ultimately, hydration is not just water, and people who are
Mhm.
just like slamming down like gallons of water, a day,
Oh
or
yeah.
even a
Oh, I
gallon of
did
water
that.
a day, that
It
can
was so
be really
dumb.
problematic. Yeah.
I did
Yeah,
that when I did
because you'll be
75 hard. I
exhausted.
just drank a gallon of water. I didn't know about minerals back then. And I feel like I just flushed everything out of my body. It was not
Right.
You
healthy.
know what's
Right.
interesting is I really got into drinking a lot of electrolyte water when I was pregnant because I was always dehydrated, and now I do since I'm breastfeeding, because keeping my supply up has been a thing for me. And I find when I drink, which is exclusively water with something added to it, it's not always like electrolyte powder. Like sometimes it's some lemon or, just a little pinch of high quality salt or something. But when I am remineralizing my water, I pee less. Like I drink a lot of water with electrolytes or something else added to it, and I don't feel like it's just going straight through me. So like, where's it going?
Yeah, that's
Does
Into
that
your
mean
important.
it's
breast
That's
going
cells.
into
good.
the cells?
Haven
Yeah.
has it.
Good.
That's good. Yeah. So that's a real question. Like in some cases, some people will see and notice that they swell, or they tend to be
Mm,
more swollen. And that means that they're actually not really properly able to like manage that, right?
mm,
But some people will say, yeah, and either way, they're not going to the bathroom as much, which can be a good thing. It can be a good thing. What the hope is that we're pulling those fluids more into the cells. We're actually holding on to them, and we have more hydrated cells. But you can tell, like, if you have symptoms, like if you have like swollen ankles, and you notice
mhm,
that, like, you have kind of edematous looking extremities, then you might be having trouble with the sodium content in particular. So
mm,
some of that really has to do with balance of like sodium, potassium, calcium, some of the other trace minerals. Um, and that I don't think we have really hard science on at this point. I think a lot of this becomes more about trial and error, but I don't think we can go wrong by starting to, put a pinch of salt in our water here and there, or have an electrolyte drink, even if it has, 1,000 milligrams of sodium, and testing that out and seeing like how we do. Do we have more energy? You know, and if we do, and we continue to do that, do we have other symptoms that are negative? And I think a lot of it becomes trial and error, that N of one, and kind of trying it for ourselves and seeing what really works for our bodies, because some people are salt sensitive, and that can be an issue for some people.
Yeah.
interesting.
Very interesting. All right. So let's break this down. What do women need to know about dieting and nutrition, and how they can truly nourish their bodies?
Well, I
Is there a
think
way to
that
summarize that, or is that impossible?
yeah, I think that it's definitely a loaded question, but I think that from a really, really basic standpoint, I think that one of the first ways that women can sort of know what they need to know about dieting and nutrition is first to stop listening to everybody else. Including their bestie who is on a particular diet, or whatever.
Mhm.
Like,
This worked
they
for
really need to
me.
yeah, they really need to start thinking about, like, what's going on with my body? What is the context of what's going on with my body? What stage of life am I in? Am I cycling? Am I not cycling? Am I pregnant? Am I lactating? Like, all these things really, really play into that.
Mhm.
And we have to start thinking about context. If somebody's, training really hard for something, right? Physically, athletically training for something, that's a context that they have to start thinking about their nutrition. But from a basic everyday human nutrition standpoint, I think that we can't go wrong by going back and starting to really think about getting all the processed foods out of our diet and eating real foods the majority of the time, which takes some effort sometimes, but it's not really it doesn't have to be all that difficult. Sometimes we have to change and shift in our mindset what we think about how we should be eating, or what kinds of foods we should be eating.
Mhm.
So if we think that every meal should be kind of a gourmet meal, or every meal should be like giving us the same hit in our brains that like Chick-fil-A MSG food is giving us, then we probably need to shift. Because think about it, like, you can eat vegetables raw, you can eat them cooked, and
Mhm.
Cooking them is really not that difficult. You can eat fruit right off of a tree, right? So it comes in its own packaging. So this doesn't require any processing. Of course, bread has to be baked, grain has to be milled into flour, that kind of thing. But again, we can buy that stuff. And we can buy better quality of that stuff if we want to. So these are all things we have to go back into and say, well, if I'm going to even eat a balanced meal, how easy could that be? And it could be really, really easy. But a lot of times we're used to like some of these flavors and all these things that we think we have to have in a meal. So again, it comes back to that prioritization and context. Like, what am I trying to accomplish? So eating a balanced meal, having a good protein portion, having some vegetables on your plate, maybe even some fruit, a little bit of fruit and berries or something, and having a little bit of healthy fat. Those are things that we want to have at every meal. And we can have starchy vegetables, we can have grains. There are a variety of high carbohydrate foods if we need more energy. So these can be really simply prepared. They don't have to be, heavily processed. And we can balance that at every meal. We can do that really, really easily. And starting from there is a great place to start. You don't have to count calories. You don't even have to count your macros. Just sit there and sit with these kinds of foods on your plate and start eating. And then see, when I work with people, I'll start them with a template of like, here's how much of each of these things you should eat, just in terms of like the plate of how you fill your plate, not really about, portioning out and measuring things, but just, this is how you should serve your plate. And once they start there, they're naturally oftentimes going to see what works well for them or not. They're going to see like, I seem to need a little bit more of this. And when they tell me those kinds of things, I listen. I'm like, try it. I don't know everything. I know a lot of science. I know a lot from practice, but I don't live in your body. I don't know your body as well as you do. I might know a lot of things about it because you tell me in your intake forms and maybe from some labs that we get, but ultimately those are some things. And a lot of that really comes back to your metabolic health, because your metabolic health has a huge influence on your hormonal health. So as women, when we want to have good cycles, when we want to have good hormone balance, which is everything for us, because it affects every body system, then we want to make sure that we have good metabolic health. And a lot of what we're seeing in our modern chronic disease states is affected by poor metabolic health. And that's poor blood sugar balance. And that's related to, again, the foods that were being marketed and fed. So we have to come against that whole system. We have to be willing to step away from all of that and start to look at it differently and say, what am I going to do, instead of letting someone else determine how I should be eating. And I say this as someone who loves cheeseburgers, just as much as, the next person. It doesn't mean I never eat them. It just means that, I still have context. I'm still going to have vegetables, with that meal. And if I don't, I'm going to have a whole lot more vegetables, maybe at another meal, so I'm trying to bring balance, at every meal, but sometimes maybe that works out to, throughout the day, because not every day is ideal. And as a matter of fact, what you were talking about before, Rachel, for mothers and just that whole context that you mentioned, I think all mothers should eat in the closet, to be honest. I'm kidding. Totally kidding.
Hey, that's not bad advice.
I would
The
love
only
that.
place you have any privacy is there or the bathroom. So probably, the bathroom, maybe. I don't know.
Sit on the toilet eating.
But no, I think, but again, this goes back to like that's not a simple answer, right? I would like to tell you that the first step to that would be taking deep breaths, because everybody has time for one deep breath, right? One deep breath can lead to another. And that's what I see. When somebody is in a state of stress, if you just stop them and you say, just take a deep breath and slowly let it out, they have time for that. They're resistant to it thinking that they don't have time for it, because that's what happens when you're in a stress state. But ultimately, you have that moment. And when you do that first one and you're letting that breath out, you might not feel a huge transition of like change, but it might actually allow you to be able to think, I could probably do that again, and I'll probably get more out of that next one. And you know, that might lead to 4 or 5 deep breaths that really start to calm your nervous system and really allow you to like be present with a baby screaming at you, and actually be able to digest your food. But it is more complex than that. Like I feel like that's a good first step to try. You know, and it might not work. It might not work for you in the sense that you might be like, Paula, you're stupid, you've never had kids, which is true. But but I was a nanny like you were, Rebecca. But I have some experience, you know. But I think ultimately the more problematic things to solve is really around lifestyle. And when you're in a stage like you are, you can't solve all the problems, but you can go back again and look at, I think we had this conversation, maybe Rachel, recently, your priorities, your goals, and really start to be like, what are some of the things that I could change in my life that could remove some of these additional stressors? I can't change that I have a 10, 11-month old who is like yelling at me for my food. But what are some other things that I can change to like reduce some of these other stressors? And a lot of that really comes back to lifestyle, because we're living such crazy lives. And so again, it becomes more radical, some of the things we might have to do around our lifestyle to get back some of that peace in our lives. And that's the hard part. I'm a dietitian. I'm like, I'm not an expert in like shalom, you know, I mean, thank God he's trying to teach us, but I think ultimately it really is, it comes back to a lot of bigger things in our lives that I have no input on. And that means I have to encourage you to dig into what's going on and unpack those things for yourself, to realize that those things are all impacting that moment.
Definitely.
You know,
You said something really impactful. Well, you said a lot of impactful things, but something that is important that I think some listeners can take away is, you mentioned keep it simple. You know, approach this simply when it comes to food. I learned a lesson from Rachel and I's nephew. We have a nephew that I know we look really young, but we're not, because our nephew's almost 30, and one of them, not all of them. We have a lot of nephews, and I have even more nephews because all of Rachel's children are boys. So, point is, he's actually a bodybuilder right now. He's in that kind of stage of his life where he's working on his fitness and all that. And he came to visit a month or two ago, and he kept saying, I want to make you dinner. And I'm like, I didn't know you knew how to cook, but cool, man. Yeah, make me dinner. And I watched him go in the kitchen, and he made a very simple dinner. It was fish. He seasoned it very nicely, rice, and broccoli. And I could not believe that he made that entire meal in like 20 minutes. The kitchen was basically clean when he made the dinner, and it was absolutely delicious. And I just felt like such an idiot in that moment, because I overthink meals. I feel like meals need to be all these ingredients, and it needs to be so complicated and have all these flavors and all this stuff. And he literally went in there and made 3 things, and it was fast and delicious. And I think that
absolutely.
that's a lesson I learned, is stop overthinking it. Just buy a piece of fish, make some rice, throw some broccoli in it, and you have a meal that consists of all of the food groups,
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
macronutrients that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great point. And you can build on that. You can build some variety into your meals by like saying, okay, I'm going to have a different starch tomorrow. I'm going to have a different
starch,
vegetable tomorrow.
Mhm.
But yeah, some of the fastest meals that I have recipes for, and actually in the free meal plan that I shared with you with your audience, the fish dishes are the fastest. They're all like under 20, they're 20 minutes or under. And that includes like the vegetables and everything that goes with them. And so fish is a great fast meal if you are interested in learning how to prepare it. And there are some intricacies to that. But it's not impossible.
No,
It's just it's
no,
impossible if we keep telling ourselves it's impossible, but it's actually
sure.
really, really easy to do. And so that's a great point. I think again, we have to look and unpack what's in our minds about how do I do this? And that's another area where maybe we've been taught, we don't know, I'm like, by who, that, all meals need to be fantastic and gourmet or have to have
Yeah.
20 ingredients.
Yeah.
Just doesn't have to be that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
Definitely.
have to go back and do that work ourselves, right? Because even as a dietitian, and if I'm interviewing someone about what they eat, I don't always get that kind of information. Even if I dig deep, we don't always get to that information. So oftentimes people have to be able to unpack that themselves.
Yeah. So speaking of food, we mentioned it last episode. I'm going to mention it again. Paula has very kindly given us a free resource with some food samples, examples of meals that include 30 grams of protein. And definitely reach out to Paula. I'll put her contact info in those show notes as well. But Paula, could you kind of just give us a little bit of a glimpse of what maybe a day might look like, or really not what it'll sound like? What a day
Yeah,
might sound like.
yeah. So breakfast is a really important meal, whether you eat it early or late. But it's really important because we now understand that protein is also a signal. It's not just a nutrient that like gives us these building blocks. It's signaling our body to do something. It's signaling our muscles. There are signals happening. And so when you've been fasting for a long time, breakfast is going to be important. That protein at breakfast is going to be important. So like in the morning, one egg's not going to cut it, right? So you want to have a good source of protein. It might look like maybe 2 eggs and a couple of sausage links that are like really good size, or maybe sausage patties, um, or maybe even less processed. It might be a piece of leftover meat from another meal. In addition to those eggs. And then you might have a little bit of vegetables. Maybe you scrambled the eggs and put a little bit of vegetables in. And then you also can have maybe a slice of toast, maybe a tortilla. There's a number of ways you can go about getting a little bit of carbohydrate, the protein, and then you're going to cook that in some fat, some kind of healthy fat. Maybe it's coconut oil, maybe it's avocado oil, maybe it's wonderful grass-fed butter. So that would be like a simple way to like look at how breakfast should look. It could also be, if you are a yogurt type, it could be, if you do dairy, it could be Greek yogurt, which is very high in protein, with some berries. And maybe some sort of, it could be cheese, it could be a little piece of meat from the night before, so that you can have some other protein. And then for lunch,
Or
it would be,
cottage cheese. Isn't that all the
yeah,
rage right
cottage
now?
cheese is another one. Yeah,
It's back
and you
in.
can, yeah, and you can have vegetables with that if you want, but it's like it doesn't always have to be, the vegetables. You want to have some kind of colorful food at all your meals, and that oftentimes is vegetables, but might also include some fruit.
Okay.
And then for lunch, you might have, let's say something really simple. It might be a piece of leftover chicken. You have a piece of leftover chicken. You have maybe some frozen vegetables that you take out and you run through a steamer, or maybe you've already heated them and you're just reheating them. And then you have maybe a sweet potato, half of a sweet potato, depends on the size, if it's a large sweet potato. But something simple, like it doesn't have to be like a big preparation process. It could be, maybe you have bread, maybe you like sandwiches, but you're going to want to have a significant amount of protein on that sandwich if you have a sandwich. And it's going to probably need to be on whole grain bread if you're going to do that. But in addition to that, you'd want to have vegetables on the side. So you're wanting to have about half of your plate filled with vegetables, maybe some fruit. So you always want to have some kind of color in the form of like a plant food in addition to that. And then at dinner, that's when a lot of people really make the effort to prepare something. And I always say, that's another meal, another bookend meal. So you want to have a significant amount of protein there. So make sure that you're prioritizing something like, it could be a steak, it could be ground beef. Doesn't have to be the most pricey stuff on the market. But it can be as simple as a steak, half of a steak split between two people, if that's how it works in your house. Or you have a few steaks and you do that. And then you have maybe a roasted vegetable, something like asparagus goes great with steak. Takes about 12 minutes, whether you put it in what are they called? Air fryers. Whether you put it in an air fryer or a toaster oven or an actual oven, doesn't matter. Pretty easy to do. And then again, you might have something like rice or wild rice, which is a great non-grain, because wild rice is actually not a grain. Something that has more nutrition, something that's actually a brown rice or wild rice or something like that. So it'd be really, really simple. It doesn't have to be hard. Rice takes about 15 minutes, 20 minutes to cook if it's white rice. So, not ideal, but about 45 minutes if it's brown rice, and wild rice is probably about the same. So you can cook these things ahead though. You can make these things ahead of time when you're actually planning for your weeks. You can have rice in your refrigerator, which is great, by the way, for those resistant starches that feed your gut microbiome. So that's like a great little addition. Anyway, this is way too much more than you asked, but it can be really,
No,
really
that was
simple.
that was a great sample. That was a great sample to just kind of walk people through what that might look like.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so you'll see when you get the little meal plan, you'll see, not meal plan, I said meal plan, but it's recipes. When you get the recipes, you'll see that it's very similar to what I described. And a lot of most of these recipes are going to be require 30 minutes or less to prepare. So very, very
Awesome.
simple. Yeah.
Awesome. And then the most important part of this meal that Paula just mentioned is when you make that dinner, make it after your kids go to bed. So you can take a breath and chew your food.
Take your deep
and
breaths
digest it.
and chew your food. Those are the biggest pieces of advice. And chew your food, like,
or eat in the closet.
Or eat in the closet or the
or
bathroom.
the bathroom.
Gotta do what you
Well,
gotta do sometimes.
I imagine there are people who have done this. So there's
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Listen, I love me a good steak, but I want to enjoy my steak. Although I will say
Enjoy.
that is, I gotta enjoy it. That's a big thing that we always say, Paula, and we enjoy it. My littlest, my little Brinny, she loves steak. I give her a little piece. She puts it in her little cheek. She only has 3 teeth in the front, but she just gnaws on that. So I don't mind eating steak with Bryn.
It sounds like Haven.
Yes, yeah.
Rachel's little.
Yeah,
Yep.
we already decided, because his first birthday is next month, that on his birthday, instead of letting him have cake, we're gonna get him a tomahawk steak and present it, singing happy birthday. But he loves it so much. And like, why give him his first taste of sugar when we already know he loves steak?
I love it. I'm all for
And
it.
that's what I will confess to my dietitian friend, and not that I only ate chips for lunch today. Oops, I guess I did confess.
You did. You
That's okay.
did.
She's coming over
I
tomorrow. It
didn't
sounds
have
like
time between all the screaming.
she's gonna come clean you up tomorrow, Ray, and
Yeah,
make sure that you guys have a
exactly.
nourishing dinner.
That's right.
This has been awesome.
Yeah.
That's the way to
Seriously,
close.
love having you. We could do 100 episodes, and maybe we should. Maybe maybe we need to
Well, or
plan a
maybe
longer
it's time for me to
series.
start that podcast I've been saying I'm going to start.
That's true,
So there's
Paula. Come
that.
on, girl. Well, if you need
Yeah.
help, just
It's
call
next
Rachel
up
and
on the
I.
project list.
Awesome. Anything you want our listeners to leave with today?
I think that one of the things that we didn't talk about as much as I thought we would is that duality thing. That the nervous system is one of the examples of that. The fight or flight, the rest and digest. I think that if we can start to think about like how things are impacting us, what things are that we're doing in our bodies or to our bodies, what it's costing us. So when we think about diet culture and dieting and eating, we really want to think about like, what am I doing here? What am I trying to accomplish? What are my goals? But then also, what is it costing me if it's not ideal? If it's not the ideal, what is this actually costing me? Because the price we're willing to pay individually differs from person to person, and I think that's always going to be a factor. What are my goals? And then what's the cost of accomplishing that? What's the cost of not doing that? These are things we should always be asking questions about. And that is always based on what our value systems are, what we're trying to accomplish. And that takes everybody else out of the picture. So I think that's probably the number one thing when it comes to our health that I think people should really be thinking about.
Awesome. Thank you
That's
so
great.
much, Paula. Listeners,
thank
you
you,
can
Paula.
find Paula at paulacarper.com. I will put those details in the show notes along with her free recipes and more information on how to contact her. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for tuning in and being on this journey with us. If you'd like to listen and follow along outside the podcast, you can do so on YouTube, Instagram, and on Facebook at The Radiant Mission. And today we are going to be closing with 3 John 1 verse 2. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we will see you next time. Bye,
Bye, guys.
everyone.
Bye.